My mom's the HOA president, dude. This cabin's ours now. The kid standing on my porch couldn't have been more than 17. Designer hoodie vape tucked behind his ear, mirrored shades reflecting the lake. He spoke with the kind of confidence only someone who'd never been told no in his life could muster. I just stood there, coffee in hand, watching him strut around my dock like he was inspecting property he owned. The lake behind him was calm, the birds still singing, and yet I could already feel the tension building like thunder. My name's Brian Nelson, and what this kid didn't know is that I wasn't just some random homeowner. I'm the chief of police in this county. I came here for peace and quiet, but peace has a funny way of disappearing when an HOA thinks it owns the world. I smiled slowly. Kid, you just claimed territory from the wrong man. Before this gets messy, tell me where you're watching from and what time it is, and don't forget to subscribe because you're about to see what happens when the law meets the HOA. By the time the kid swaggered back down my driveway, I already knew what I was dealing with. His kind of arrogance didn't grow on its own. It was cultivated, fertilized, and proudly displayed by someone far more dangerous, his mother. Her name was Grace Moore, and around Crystal Pines she was treated like royalty. Pink blazer, pearl earrings, SUV so white it could blind you under the noon Sunday. Grace didn't just run the HOA, she was the HOA. When I first moved out here 6 months ago, neighbors warned me about her. Watch out for Mrs. Moore, they said. She means well. Until she doesn't. I laughed it off. I thought I'd seen every kind of power trip in my 20 years as chief of police. But I'd never met anyone who weaponized picket fences and bylaws quite like Grace Moore. The first sign came 2 weeks after I bought the cabin. A letter from the HOA, fancy letterhead, gold logo, unnecessary bold fonts. Notice of property noncompliance. Your cabin's exterior paint color, cedar brown, is not within the HOA's approved palette. Please repaint to one of the following tones: lake sand, pebble mist, or tranquil taupe. I called the HOA office thinking it was a mistake. The woman who answered hesitated before whispering aisle. Tell Mrs. Moore you called, and that was that. 2 hours later, my phone buzzed with an unknown number. Mr. Nelson came the voice, sweet, crisp, commanding. This is Grace Moore, president of the Crystal Pines Homeowners Association. I see you've received our letter. I did, I replied calmly. And I also see my property lies outside HOA jurisdiction. Bought it that way on purpose. There was a pause, then a short, polite laugh that didn't reach her eyes. Oh, I think you'll find that the HOA lines were updated last year. We've recently integrated the lakeside properties for community improvement. That was the first time I heard her say community improvement. Every tyrant hides behind that phrase. I'll be sure to look into that, I said and hung up. Over the next few months, I watched Grace's empire in action. She fined retirees for hanging wind chimes. She threatened a single mother because her front yard gnome clashed with the neighborhood aesthetic. She banned outdoor grills, then hosted a HOA barbecue fundraiser on her own lawn. And somehow, everyone complied. Why? Because Grace Moore ran everything: the committees, the newsletter, the beautification fund. She even controlled who got elected onto the HOA board. The woman could charm you at a meeting and bankrupt you with a vote the next day. So when her son Ethan declared that my cabin was the HOA's property, I knew it wasn't just teenage stupidity. It was learned behavior. 3 days after that confrontation, an email landed in my inbox. Subject line: Community Event Access Request. Approved by HOA. The body of the email read like an official document complete with HOA seal and signatures. Per Section 8B of the Crystal Pines Community Charter, the HOA will utilize the lakeside cabin for a youth graduation celebration. We appreciate your cooperation in fostering a sense of unity and belonging among residents. The email was signed, Grace E. Moore, HOA President. At the bottom, there was a cheerful note: please ensure the property is unlocked by Friday, 5:00 p.m. I leaned back in my chair, reading it twice. Unlocked. Like it already belonged to them. That evening, I drove into town to visit the county records office. I didn't tell anyone who I was. I just asked the clerk, a young guy with a buzz cut, for the Crystal Pines zoning map. After flipping through old files, he looked up and frowned. Your cabin's not part of that HOA, sir. The border ends at Ridge Creek Road. Exactly what I thought, I said. Then why are they sending you HOA stuff? He asked. Because, I said, some people think authority grows like mold quietly and everywhere. The next morning, my phone rang again. Mr. Nelson Grace's voice came syrupy, sweet, but brittle underneath. I'm just calling to confirm that you've received the event notice. I have, I said evenly, and I'm calling to confirm that I won't be unlocking my property for anyone. There was silence, then a chuckle. Oh, I see. You must not understand how these things work. The HOA has communal rights under revised zoning ordinances. This cabin technically falls under shared use. That's funny, I replied, because according to county records, your authority ends half a mile east of my dock. Her tone sharpened. You may want to rethink your tone, Mr. Nelson. We can issue fines, revoke access. Ma'am, I interrupted gently, you can't revoke something that was never yours. The silence that followed was glorious. But I knew that kind of ego doesn't back down easily. So instead of arguing, I decided to observe. I installed new cameras, small, discreet, motion-triggered. I made copies of my property deed and laminated them. And I started quietly digging into the HOA's financial statements. You'd be surprised how many people treat HOA budgets like private checking accounts. It didn't take long before I found something strange. A line item labeled Community Youth Engagement Initiative, $12,000. When I asked around, no one in the community had ever heard of such a program. $12,000. Gone. No receipts. 2 days later, I saw Grace's white Escalade pull into my driveway. She stepped out all pearls and perfume, carrying a clipboard like it was a scepter. Ethan followed behind, grinning like a prince about to inherit a kingdom. Mr. Nelson, Grace began, I wanted to come by personally to ensure we're on the same page. The graduation celebration will proceed as planned. I took a sip of coffee. On my property. On community property, she corrected. And the HOA has already allocated funds for cleanup and supervision. I smiled. Allocated from which account? The same one you used for your youth engagement initiative. Her smile faltered. Excuse me, oh nothing, I said, shrugging. Just curious where the community money goes these days. For the first time, Grace looked genuinely uncomfortable. She adjusted her necklace, muttered something about improving morale, then snapped her clipboard shut. Friday at 6, she said curtly, turning to leave. Don't make this harder than it needs to be. Trust me, I replied. You're the one making it harder. When she drove off, I stood there watching the dust settle. The sun glinted off the lake like it was winking at me. If she wanted a party, she'd get one, but it wouldn't end how she expected. I picked up my phone and called an old friend from the sheriff's office. Rodriguez, I said I might need a few off-duty patrol units at Crystal Pines this weekend. Possible unauthorized gathering, underage drinking, trespassing, the usual. He chuckled. You're finally poking the HOA bear, huh? Not yet, I said. I'm just setting the table. That night I poured myself a small glass of bourbon and sat out on the dock, watching the moonlight ripple across the water. If Grace Moore wanted to test how far her authority reached, I was happy to show her inch by inch, document by document, warrant by warrant. Because I wasn't just another homeowner trying to mind his business. I was the law she thought she could bend. And come Friday night, the HOA was about to learn what happens when the queen of paper rules walks straight into the court of cold, hard justice. By Wednesday, the stillness of Crystal Pines felt like the quiet before a storm. The lake shimmered with that deceptive calm only nature and bureaucracy can share. I'd learned long ago both can destroy you slowly if you ignore the warning signs. That morning, my motion-triggered cameras pinged my phone. There he was, Ethan Moore, marching straight onto my property with 2 of his friends. They weren't sneaking, they were filming. One of them spun around with a drone, capturing the dock, the trees, the reflection of my cabin on the water. Ethan pointed at the porch and laughed, shouting something the mic didn't catch. Then he lifted my old fishing hat, the one that had belonged to my father, and put it on backward for a selfie. The caption he later posted read number My Lake Life, number Ho Party Prep number Thanks Mom. My jaw clenched, but my pulse stayed steady. Anger was easy, proof was power. So instead of storming out there, I poured another cup of coffee and watched him through the live feed quietly, noting every trespass, every second, every angle. By noon, they'd already crossed another line. I received a delivery notification. Your order of 3 folding beer pong tables has been delivered. Delivered to my address. When I drove into town later that day, I saw the delivery truck parked near the HOA office. The driver told me a Mrs. Moore had called confirming the drop-off location. I smiled politely, thanked him, and jotted his name down for later. That evening, I called my attorney Jim Wallace a no-nonsense guy who handled more HOA drama than divorce cases. He listened quietly as I described the situation. Classic overreach, he said finally. They assume if no one pushes back, the HOA's word becomes law. I'm not pushing yet, I replied. I'm documenting, he chuckled. You're still the same patient son of a gun you were back when we busted that land fraud case. Patience builds leverage, I said. Just don't wait too long, he warned. These people love to rewrite rules while you're still reading them. He wasn't wrong. The next day, I received a revised HOA newsletter printed in full color and stuffed into every mailbox in the community. It read, Upcoming community event youth graduation celebration at Lakeside Cabin courtesy of HOA partnership with local residents. We're thrilled to announce that the HOA has secured access to the Lakeside Cabin for the benefit of our youth. Special thanks to our supportive homeowners who make events like this possible. Below that was a small photo of my cabin, my deck, my chairs, my boat. I took a deep breath and counted to 10, then 20. Then I started laughing. This wasn't arrogance anymore. It was delusion. Friday approached like a ticking clock. I checked every camera angle, replaced SD cards, printed timestamps. Then I started looking deeper into Grace Moore's digital fingerprints. HOA bylaws are public records, so I compared the version on file with the one she'd sent me earlier that week. The difference: one subtle line added under Section 5, the association may temporarily use any community-adjacent property for approved activities benefiting residents. Community-adjacent, a term that meant absolutely nothing in zoning law. She'd literally written herself permission to invade. Thursday evening, the first trucks arrived. Teenagers unloading speakers, lights, and beer coolers. They looked around like it was a movie set. When one of them saw the private property sign nailed to my gate, he laughed and said, "Oh, Mrs. Moore said, ignore that." I stepped out onto my porch and gave a polite wave. "Evening, boys," I called. "You're early for tomorrow's arrest." They froze, exchanging confused glances, then hurried back to their truck. I watched them leave, then turned the lock on my gate and set up an extra camera facing the driveway. The bait was laid. That night, my phone buzzed again, another security alert. Grace herself striding up my walkway in heels, clipboard in hand. She didn't knock this time. She tried the door handle, locked. She looked straight into the camera and muttered, "He'll regret this." Then she left. I replayed the clip 3 times. The lawman in me smiled. Trespass, intent, threat, 3 charges, 1 clip. Friday morning came bright and heavy with humidity. I cleaned the porch, checked the locks again, and waited. At exactly 5:47 p.m., the sound of engines broke the peace. Car after car rolled in BMWs, Jeeps, one stretch SUV blasting pop music. Teenagers poured out with beer cases and party lights, led by none other than Ethan Moore, now wearing my father's hat like a crown. "Mom said it's fine," he shouted to no one in particular. I watched from inside, calm as a man setting a trap. They clipped my chain lock, pushed open the gate, and rolled their coolers across my lawn. Someone set up a portable speaker near the dock, music blasting over the water. A few kids jumped straight into the lake, splashing and yelling. It would have been a normal teenage party if it wasn't on my land. Grace Moore arrived an hour later. Her Escalade pulled up like a presidential motorcade, headlights sweeping over the crowd. She stepped out in her trademark pink blazer and high heels, holding a champagne flute. "Welcome, everyone," she shouted, voice echoing across the lake. "The HOA is proud to sponsor this event for our amazing youth." Applause. Cheers. A few parents I didn't recognize smiled nervously, pretending to belong. She spotted me standing on the porch and gave a condescending little wave. "Mr. Nelson, thank you for letting us use your beautiful property." I raised my phone and said evenly, "Don't worry, I'm recording every word of that." Her smile twitched. "Oh, lighten up. It's for the kids, then maybe host it on your lawn," I said. She took a sip of champagne. "We're all part of the same community." "Not legally," I replied. That one hit her. The mask slipped for just a second. The night spiraled from there. By 9 p.m., the dock was shaking with music. Teens drank openly tossed cans into the water, and someone set off a small box of fireworks. My cameras caught it all, every open container, every illegal ignition, every trespass. I stayed on my porch, silent and patient. When one drunk teenager puked near my grill, I made a note of the time, 9:42 p.m. Then I heard shouting. Ethan standing on top of a cooler, yelling for attention. "This is our lake now." "HOA rules, baby," his friends cheered. Grace laughed. And that's when my phone buzzed. "Sheriff's units in position," came Rodriguez's voice. "You want the lights yet?" "Not yet," I said. "Give them 15 more minutes. Let the queen crown herself." 15 minutes later, Grace marched up to my porch again, clearly tipsy. "Mr. Nelson," she slurred, "I really must insist you stop filming. This is community property tonight." "You sure about that?" I asked. "Because I just confirmed with the county assessor. This address is 100% mine." She blinked, confused, then hissed, "Don't make me call the police." I smiled. "Ma'am, that's the best idea you've had all night." I stepped back into the cabin, pulled on my navy blue jacket, clipped my badge to the front, and opened the door again. The crowd froze. Grace's champagne glass slipped from her hand and shattered on the porch. Ethan's jaw dropped. I adjusted my collar, my voice carrying over the music. Everyone here is trespassing on private property. Anyone under 21 with alcohol, step aside. The rest of you prepare to be ID'd. Dad, what Ethan stammered. I'm not your dad, son, I said calmly. I'm the chief of police. The air went dead quiet except for the sound of the lake lapping against the dock. Then from somewhere in the dark came the wail of sirens. Flashing red and blue lights lit up the night like the 4th of July. And as the first patrol cars rolled in, Grace whispered the last words I'd ever hear from her as HOA president. Oh, dear God. The sound of sirens always had a way of changing the air. That rising wail-sharp electric can cut through laughter faster than any weapon. As the first cruiser turned down the gravel road toward my cabin, the kids froze, mid-dance, mid-drink, mid-denial. Their faces, once lit by LED party lights, turned ghostly blue in the flashing strobes. Grace Moore's smile vanished. She turned toward the lake, blinking against the light as if she could will the cars away. Turn those off, she barked. This is a private event. I stepped forward, my badge glinting under the cruiser beam. No, ma'am, I said evenly. This is an illegal event on private property. Ethan looked around, the first flicker of fear in his eyes. Mom, what's happening? Grace didn't answer. She just muttered. He couldn't, but I could. And I had. The first 2 deputies out of the cars were Rodriguez and Carter, both off-duty officers who knew exactly why they were here. They fanned out with quiet professionalism, flashlights cutting across the yard, illuminating beer cans, broken bottles, and a deflated inflatable swan half buried in the mud. Rodriguez nodded toward me. Chief. Deputy, I replied. Ethan stumbled forward, face pale. Wait, you're a cop, chief of police, I corrected. And you're about to have a very educational night, he stammered, but Mom said, I know I interrupted. Your mom says a lot of things. Grace finally found her voice. She marched toward me, heels clicking on the wood deck. Brian Nelson, this is an abuse of power. These are children. You're traumatizing them. I tilted my head. You mean the same children drinking stolen alcohol and destroying my property? This is a misunderstanding, she insisted. The HOA authorized. I cut her off. You are the HOA, Grace. You authorized yourself to break into my cabin, vandalize it, and throw a party funded by community money. That's not a misunderstanding. That's fraud. Her face reddened under the lights. I'll sue you, I smiled. You're welcome to after booking. She laughed, but it came out brittle. You can't arrest me on my own property. This isn't your property, I said softly. And you're not immune from the law. Deputy Carter approached with a clipboard. Chief, you'll want to see this. He handed me an invoice pulled from the catering truck parked by the gate. Invoice Sunshine Catering Co. Event Graduation Celebration. Authorized by Grace Moore, HOA President. Amount $3,218.64. Paid via HOA account. Grace's expression cracked like glass. That's just a community expense. Sure, I said, flipping the page. Listed under Community Engagement Program, right. The same fund you've been moving money from for months. Her hand trembled. You can't prove I raised my phone. Smile. The screen played back the earlier footage of her trying my doorknob, muttering, He'll regret this. Her mouth opened, but no words came out. Ethan tried to bolt. Rodriguez caught him halfway down the path, steady but firm. Easy there, kid, he said. We're not cuffing you yet. But I didn't do anything wrong, Ethan shouted. Mom said it was allowed. Rodriguez sighed, shaking his head. Son, that's not how the law works. I walked over, calm but unyielding. Ethan Moore, you're being detained for trespassing, property damage, and possession of alcohol as a minor. He blinked at me, eyes wide with disbelief. You can't arrest me. My mom's in charge here. Behind him, Grace shouted, Don't you dare touch my son. I turned to her, voice steady as granite. He needs to learn what accountability looks like, and so do you. The deputies began reading rights, gathering names, lining up kids who looked one bad decision away from tears. The flashing lights painted the water red and blue, a mirror of chaos reflected back by the calm lake surface. A few parents arrived, drawn by panicked phone calls. One woman clutched her purse like a shield, whispering, I thought it was an HOA event. It was, I said, until the law showed up. By the time backup units arrived, the music was silent. The crowd divided neatly into groups, the crying, the texting, and the pretending not to care. Grace paced near the dock, muttering under her breath, rage simmering beneath every movement. When I approached, she spun around. You set me up, she hissed. You wanted this to happen. I nodded once. I wanted proof. And you provided plenty. You're a disgrace, she snapped. Using your badge to settle personal vendettas, I smiled faintly. Funny. I thought you'd be grateful someone finally enforcing the law around here. Her jaw tightened. "Do you know who I am?" "Yes," I said. "A woman about to lose her title." Deputy Carter returned. "Chief environmental team's on their way. We found open fuel containers near the dock. Some kids were lighting fireworks right beside them." I turned to Grace. "You realize if that caught, half the shoreline would have gone up in flames. Congratulations, you almost made the evening news for a lake fire." She swallowed hard. "You can't pin that on me." "Grace," I said, lowering my voice, "you funded it, organized it, approved it, and stood in the middle of it. It's already pinned." The officers began escorting the kids to waiting cars. Most were being released to their parents, but Ethan wasn't so lucky. He'd crossed too many lines, breaking the lock, entering the cabin, even pocketing my father's fishing hat. When Rodriguez retrieved it from him, he looked embarrassed, small for the first time that night. I took the hat and brushed off the dirt. "This belonged to my dad," I said quietly. "He wore it the day he taught me how to respect what isn't yours. Maybe someday you'll get that lesson too." Ethan didn't answer. He just nodded, eyes fixed on the ground. Grace tried one last desperate move. "I'll call the mayor," she shrieked. "He's on my HOA board." "Already did," I said. "He's on his way with a warrant." She blinked, lost. "A warrant," I gestured toward the incoming unmarked sedan rolling up behind the cruisers. Out stepped County Investigator Linda Hayes, a woman with a reputation sharper than barbed wire. "Evening, Chief," she said, nodding. "Got your message? We've been tracing the HOA funds since your tip last week." Grace went pale. Tip Hayes smiled thinly. "You didn't think no one would notice the missing 12 grand, did you?" Within seconds, Hayes' team started pulling boxes from Grace's SUV, receipts, folders, a laptop bag. "This is harassment," Grace screamed, her voice cracking. "No, ma'am," Hayes replied calmly. "This is a search warrant." I watched it all unfold, the panic, the unraveling, the hollow arrogance collapsing into fear. Grace Moore, queen of the HOA, was suddenly just another suspect under flashing lights. As they read her rights, she turned toward me, eyes wide with disbelief. "You'll regret this," she whispered. "You think you've won. You have no idea who you're dealing with." I looked past her toward the silent lake, now bathed in red and blue. "Oh, I know exactly who I'm dealing with," I said. "And for once, so do you." By midnight, the yard was empty. The cruisers left slow trails of dust down the road. My dock creaked softly in the dark. I stood there alone, the smell of spilled beer and burnt fireworks still hanging in the air. Rodriguez came up beside me. "Hell of a night, Chief." I nodded. "Yeah, and it's only the beginning." He raised an eyebrow. "You think she'll fight it?" "Oh, she'll fight," I said. "But the thing about fighting the law..." I looked at the reflection of the badge on my chest glimmering in the water. "The law doesn't get tired." Inside the cabin, I set the recovered hat on the table next to my stack of evidence, photos, invoices, camera footage. My coffee mug sat where I'd left it that morning, cold and untouched. For a moment, I allowed myself a small, quiet laugh. Grace Moore had wanted a party. She got a raid. And come Monday morning, the entire HOA would wake up to the headline, "HOA President Arrested at Underage Party. Police Chief Hosts Surprise Intervention." Somewhere my father would have smiled. By sunrise, word had already spread like wildfire through Crystal Pines. Every porch light flicked on early that Saturday morning, and every gossip group chat in the community had one topic: Grace Moore's party arrest. The HOA queen, who once fined people for parking crooked, now had her mugshot circulating in local news feeds. One photo showed her in handcuffs under the flashing lights, mascara-streaked pink blazer askew. Someone had captioned it, "HOA Rule #47 Don't Commit Fraud," in front of the chief of police. I didn't have to read the comments to know what they said, half outrage, half delight. The tyrant of Crystal Pines had fallen, and everyone wanted a front row seat. Still, the law doesn't end when the lights go out. By 8:00 a.m., I was back at the station, paperwork stacked high on my desk. Rodriguez and Carter were already sorting evidence, video files, photos, receipts, witness statements. The smell of coffee and exhaustion filled the room. Chief Rodriguez said, handing me a clipboard, "We've got 8 confirmed minors with alcohol in their system, 3 parents claiming Grace said it was allowed, and 1 catering company wanting to file for unpaid invoices." "Unpaid?" I asked. He nodded. Apparently she promised they'd be reimbursed from HOA funds, but the account she gave them was already frozen. "Perfect," I muttered. "Add theft by deception to the list." By mid-morning, the county prosecutor, Sandra Ellis, walked in her heels, clicking like a metronome of authority. "Morning, Chief," she said, setting down her tablet. "I've reviewed your evidence package. It's airtight. Fraud, trespass, embezzlement, and contributing to the delinquency of minors. You've built us a buffet." "I wasn't hungry," I said dryly, "but I'll take the win." she smirked. We're filing charges today. The HOA board will have no choice but to suspend her. You know she's already called 3 attorneys. Let her, I said. The law doesn't bend for designer heels. At noon, I got a call from Mayor Peters, a man whose spine bent more easily than wet cardboard. Chief, we're getting a lot of attention about this HOA situation, he began nervously. Grace is saying it's political. It's criminal, I corrected. And I've got the proof to back it. Well, she's threatening to sue the city, he continued. Claims we're retaliating because of her leadership in the community. I leaned back in my chair. Then she can explain to a jury why her leadership involved forged invoices and stolen property. There was a long pause, followed by a sigh. You're enjoying this a little, aren't you? Maybe just a little, I admitted. Outside the police department, the parking lot filled with reporters by afternoon. Microphones, cameras, flashing bulbs like vultures, circling fresh meat. One of them shouted, Chief Nelson, did you set up the HOA president? I stopped at the steps, straightened my uniform, and looked straight into the lens. I didn't set anyone up, I said. I just let the truth walk right into my jurisdiction. Meanwhile, the HOA office across town looked like a war zone. I heard from a few sympathetic residents that the board members were turning on each other, pointing fingers, shredding documents, and whispering about a secret fund Grace had hidden for years. By evening, I received confirmation from Investigator Hayes. Grace's community engagement fund had funneled more than $48,000 into her personal account over 3 years. Spa trips home, remodels, luxury handbags. The receipts told the story better than I ever could. She hadn't just broken the law, she'd broken the trust of every person she lorded over. That night, the phone rang again. Unknown number. I answered anyway. Brian. The voice was shaky, slurred, but unmistakably hers. Grace, I said. You shouldn't be calling me. I just wanted to explain, she murmured. You don't understand what it's like keeping this neighborhood in order. People expect me to handle everything. The landscaping, the complaints, the parties. You mean the embezzlement, the threats, the fake zoning? She laughed weakly. You sound just like my husband. How's he doing? I asked. He hasn't answered our subpoenas. Gone, she said flatly. Packed a bag last night. Said he's tired of cleaning up my messes. There was a pause. For a moment, I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. You know, Grace, I said quietly, you could have just asked people for help instead of controlling them. Her voice cracked. I built this place. I am Crystal Pines. I sighed. No, you just forgot it wasn't yours to own. Then I hung up. By Monday morning, the official charges were filed. The courthouse steps overflowed with spectators. Grace arrived in a navy suit instead of her usual pink, escorted by her lawyer. The cameras flashed, but the smile she tried to force looked brittle. Inside her, lawyer argued everything from procedural misconduct to political entrapment. The judge wasn't impressed. When it was my turn to testify, I stood straight badge, glinting under the courtroom lights, and described everything: timeline footage, statements, financial records. Grace's eyes followed me the entire time. There was no hatred left, just disbelief that her world had finally collapsed. When the evidence of her catering payments and fake easement document came up, her lawyer stopped objecting. He knew it was over. After the hearing, I stepped outside to find a crowd of residents waiting. They clapped. Some smiled. Others just looked relieved. A man I'd never met before, retired, gray-haired, trembling, shook my hand. Thank you, he said. She fined me $200 for leaving my trash bin out an extra hour. I thought nobody could stop her. I smiled faintly. Everyone stops eventually. That evening, the HOA board held an emergency meeting. For the first time, it wasn't at Grace's mansion, but in the community hall. I wasn't invited, but I didn't need to be. Word spread fast. They'd voted unanimously to remove her from power. Her accounts were frozen, her access revoked, her title stripped from every document. The once feared queen of the HOA was now just another name on the county docket. 2 weeks later, I met with Investigator Hayes again at the courthouse. She handed me a folder thick with final evidence. You were right, she said. The numbers match perfectly. Moore diverted HOA money into a personal fund, falsified receipts, and even forged 3 board members' signatures. It's enough for multiple felony counts. Good work, I said. Hayes grinned. I hear she's blaming you for everything. Let her, I replied. That's one accusation I can live with. That night I returned to the lake for the first time since the raid. The air smelled of rain and the surface of the water shimmered with moonlight. I sat at the edge of the dock, the same place where Ethan had once posed with my father's fishing hat. The cabin lights reflected softly on the ripples. Everything was quiet again. For the first time in weeks I felt peace, not the kind that comes from silence but from closure. Then I heard the crunch of tires on gravel. Rodriguez pulled up window down. "You did it," he said. "The HOA's finally clean." I smiled. "Yeah, but I didn't do it for them." He tilted his head. "Then for who? For the lake," I said softly. "For the people who just wanted to live without fear of fines or threats? For the ones who forgot that community should mean respect, not control." He nodded slowly. "You ever think about running for mayor?" I laughed. "After this week, I'd rather wrestle an alligator." When he left, I lingered on the dock watching lightning flicker over the distant hills. Somewhere in town, Grace Moore was sitting in a holding cell, probably still convincing herself she'd done nothing wrong. That's the thing about power, it blinds you slowly. And when the light finally goes out, you're left standing in the dark wondering when you stop being the hero of your own story. I looked down at my badge's reflection in the lake. It wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about the principle. Because sometimes justice doesn't roar, it simply shows up calm and certain with a flashlight and a pen. And that night justice had a name. Mine. 3 weeks after the arrests, Crystal Pines no longer looked like the same neighborhood. The manicured lawns still shone under the morning sun, the mailboxes still matched in perfect symmetry, but the illusion of order had cracked wide open. Every picket fence now whispered gossip. Every driveway had an opinion. The once invincible Grace Moore, former president of the HOA, was out on bail, but her empire had turned to ash. Her white Escalade sat in the driveway like a stranded monument to arrogance tires, deflated, a thin layer of pollen dulling its shine. Her mailbox overflowed with letters from lawyers, investigators, and furious residents. I didn't have to check the news to know the story was everywhere. Local HOA president charged with fraud and trespass. The video clip of her shouting, "This is community property at my cabin," had become a meme. Someone even edited it with flashing lights, and the caption, "When you think you own the county." She wasn't laughing anymore. That morning I was on my porch repairing a section of railing when Rodriguez pulled up in his cruiser. He leaned against the door, sipping his coffee with that look that always meant, "You're gonna love this one." "Guess who tried to file a restraining order against you?" he asked. I raised an eyebrow. "Grace, ding, ding, ding," he smirked. "Claimed you were harassing her by enforcing the law." The judge dismissed it in 10 seconds. I chuckled. That might be her new record for failure. Rodriguez set down his cup. "You should know, though, she's not done. She's talking to the HOA board about reinstatement." I blinked. "She's under criminal investigation." "Yeah," he said. "Doesn't stop her from sending a 12-paragraph email about unjust persecution and gender bias." I sighed. Classic Grace. When the castle burns, blame the matchmaker. Meanwhile, the new HOA president, Helen Graves, a retired accountant in her 70s with a spine of steel, was busy cleaning up the mess. When she called me later that day, her voice was calm but firm. "Mr. Nelson, we've finished the preliminary audit. The total misappropriated funds amount to $48,716. She wrote checks to herself, listed them as beautification expenses, and even billed the HOA for her son's car insurance. Bold, I said. Illegal but bold, Helen chuckled dryly. The board has voted unanimously to press charges and revoke her membership privileges. Also, there's something else you should know. She hesitated. She took out a short-term loan against HOA assets 3 months ago, $40,000 to pay off her personal credit card debt. It was never approved. My grip tightened on the phone. So the party wasn't her first crime, just her sloppiest. Exactly, Helen said. I wanted you to hear it from me before the next warrant hits. By the end of the week, Grace was back in court, this time for the financial crimes. I was subpoenaed again, this time as both witness and victim. When I entered the courtroom, she was already seated, dressed in gray instead of pink hair pulled tight, face pale. She didn't look like a queen anymore. She looked like someone who'd finally realized the crown was made of plastic. Her lawyer, a polished man with slick back hair, tried to spin the story as a misunderstanding born of community dedication. He claimed Grace had been overzealous, not criminal, that she'd merely blurred the lines between community and personal property. When it was my turn to testify, I walked up slowly, laid my hands on the witness stand, and spoke clearly. She didn't blur lines, I said. She erased them. The courtroom was silent except for the scratching of pens. She used her position to intimidate residents, manipulate finances, and violate property boundaries. That's not leadership. That's entitlement. Grace wouldn't look at me. Her eyes stayed fixed on the table. After the hearing, I found her son Ethan waiting outside the courthouse. He looked different, no expensive hoodie, no sunglasses, no swagger, just a scared kid in a wrinkled t-shirt. Chief Nelson, he asked quietly. Yeah. He hesitated, then said I wanted to apologize. For the cabin, for the party, for everything. I studied him for a moment. His voice trembled, but there was sincerity there. You learned something, I asked. He nodded. Yeah, that rules aren't just for other people. Mom always said the HOA keeps order. I thought she meant the kind that helps people, but she just liked the power. That's the problem with unchecked authority, I said softly. It feels good right up until it ruins you. He nodded again, eyes wet. She's losing everything, isn't she? She's losing what she built on lies, I said. What she earns back, that's up to her. Ethan looked down, hands stuffed in his pockets. I wish I could fix it. You can, I said. Start by not becoming her. 2 days later, the HOA emergency meeting drew nearly every resident in Crystal Pines. The community center was packed, chairs lined up in rows, the air heavy with murmurs and simmering anger. Helen stood at the front with the microphone papers trembling slightly in her hands. We are here, she said, to address the criminal findings against former President Grace Moore and to restore trust in this association. She read out each confirmed fraud: spa retreats, catering bills, luxury purchases, all paid with HOA dues. Every item brought fresh gasps from the crowd. When Helen announced the final tally, $47,982 stolen, someone shouted, "We should sue her ourselves." Another yelled, "She made me repaint my house twice." Helen raised a hand for silence. Justice is already in motion. What we must do now is rebuild our community. Then she turned to me. Chief Nelson, would you like to say a few words? Every eye turned toward me. I stepped forward, cleared my throat, and said, all of you followed rules because you believed in fairness. That belief was used against you. Grace Moore wasn't enforcing order, she was enforcing fear. But rules don't protect people. People protect people. And you all deserve better than to live under someone who thinks a title means control. There was silence, then applause. Real applause, not the forced, polite kind that used to fill HOA meetings. For the first time since I'd moved to Crystal Pines, the place felt honest. Later that week, the final blow fell. Grace's husband Robert filed for divorce and handed over bank records confirming her secret accounts. That cooperation earned him immunity, but the betrayal crushed her remaining pride. Grace pleaded guilty to fraud, misappropriation of funds, and criminal trespass. Her sentence, 3 years in state prison, 1 year to serve 2, suspended with probation and full restitution. When the verdict was read, she didn't cry, she didn't scream. She just closed her eyes like someone finally too tired to pretend. I watched quietly from the back of the courtroom. I didn't feel joy, not even satisfaction, just closure. That night the rain came down hard. Thunder rolled over the lake as I sat by my window sipping coffee. My phone buzzed an email notification. From HOA office. Helen Graves, subject community restoration plan. The document detailed new bylaws, transparency in spending, public voting, financial oversight, and a new clause requiring independent legal review for all HOA actions. At the bottom, Helen had written, "We're calling it the Grace Moore Reform Act. Thank you for inspiring accountability." I smiled. Accountability. The one thing Grace had never believed she'd face. Before bed, I stepped out onto the porch. The air smelled clean, the lake reflecting lightning like flashes of redemption. The cabin light glowed warmly against the storm. My father's old hat, freshly cleaned and restored, hung on the wall again, right where it belonged. It struck me how poetic it all was. The HOA had built a kingdom of rules, but it took one night of chaos to remind everyone what law was supposed to mean. Law wasn't a leash, it was balance. And for the first time in months, the balance at Crystal Pines felt restored. I looked out across the dark water, whispered to no one in particular, "Good night, Your Majesty." The crowns retired. Then I closed the door, the storm washing away whatever traces of the old regime remained. The morning Grace Moore was sentenced, Crystal Pines felt unusually quiet. Even the usual joggers and dog walkers stayed indoors, as if the whole neighborhood was holding its breath. The courthouse parking lot overflowed with news vans and curious residents, their umbrellas speckled with drizzle. Everyone wanted to witness the fall of the woman who once fined them for leaving their trash cans out too long. Inside, the courtroom buzzed with a different kind of energy, a mixture of vindication and pity. Grace sat at the defense table, hands clasped tightly, wrists bare without her trademark pearls. The judge, a patient man with 30 years on the bench, adjusted his glasses and began the proceedings. "Mrs. Moore," he said, voice steady but tired, "you stand accused of multiple counts of embezzlement, fraud, and trespassing. The evidence against you is extensive. Do you have anything you wish to say before sentencing?" Grace stood slowly, her pink lipstick pale against her shaking lips. For the first time since this began, her confidence was gone. I only wanted to keep order, she said quietly. This community was falling apart. I gave it structure. I made people care. Maybe I crossed some lines, but I did it for the greater good. The judge sighed. The road to prison is often paved with good intentions, Mrs. Moore. You didn't enforce order. You abused authority. He read the verdict. 3 years state custody, 1 year to serve 2 suspended, restitution of $48,000 to the Crystal Pines HOA with full probationary oversight. Grace's knees buckled slightly as the bailiff approached. She didn't resist. For once, she didn't say a word. As they led her away, Ethan, sitting in the back row, lowered his head, face buried in his hands. After the sentencing, the courthouse emptied slowly. Residents lingered on the steps, whispering, some smug, some genuinely sad. Grace Moore had ruled them for nearly a decade. Now she was just another headline. I stood by the railing, watching the news crews pack up their equipment. Rodriguez approached, slipping his hands into his jacket pockets. Well, Chief, looks like justice finally clocked out for the day. Justice doesn't clock out, I said quietly. It just moves on to the next case. He nodded toward Ethan, who was standing off to the side alone. Kid looks broken. Good, I replied, then added after a pause, but not hopeless. A week later, I saw Ethan again, this time at the community service site near the lake. He was wearing an orange vest, collecting trash along the shoreline under the supervision of Deputy Carter. He didn't see me at first. He was focused, head down, working quietly. When I finally approached, he straightened and swallowed hard. Chief Nelson, he said, his voice steadier than before. You're making progress, I said, nodding toward the growing pile of trash bags. He gave a faint smile. Feels weird cleaning up a place I helped mess up. That's the point, I said. Restoration starts where the damage was done. He hesitated, then asked softly, do you think people will ever forgive her? I thought about that for a long moment. Maybe. But forgiveness isn't something you earn by talking. It's something you earn by changing. Ethan nodded. I don't want to end up like her. Then don't, I said simply. Every day you decide which version of yourself you want to keep. He looked out at the lake. I'm sorry for taking your hat, I smiled. Apology accepted. You took it because you thought wearing it made you powerful. Turns out it just made you responsible. Back at Crystal Pines, the HOA was slowly rebuilding. Under Helen Graves's leadership, meetings actually felt civil. There was laughter again. Transparency reports were posted online every week, and for the first time in years, residents actually trusted the people running their community. I attended one of the new meetings at Helen's invitation. The agenda was simple: new bylaws, fair fines, community events. When Helen saw me in the crowd, she smiled warmly. I'd like to thank Chief Nelson for helping restore integrity to Crystal Pines. We're introducing something tonight called the Accountability Act, which ensures no HOA president can ever approve spending without board consent. The room broke into applause. Not loud or theatrical, just genuine. It hit me then how much the place had changed. 6 months ago, everyone sat stiff, afraid of saying the wrong thing. Now they lean back in their chairs, laughing, debating, even disagreeing respectfully. That's what community was supposed to look like. But justice has a long tail. Even after Grace was gone, her shadow lingered. Property values had dipped. Some residents moved away, embarrassed to live in that HOA from the news. The new board discovered years of unpaid taxes and misfiled paperwork. Helen and her volunteers worked late nights, sorting it all out, often calling me for advice on how to handle legal forms or county inspectors. I didn't mind. It felt good to help rebuild instead of dismantle. Then one morning I found a letter slipped under my door. No return address, just a folded sheet of notebook paper. Dear Chief Nelson, I wanted to thank you for not giving up on me or on my mom. She'll be serving her time soon. She says she hates you, but I think she just hates what she became. I'm working extra shifts saving money, and I plan to pay back some of the restitution myself. Maybe one day Crystal Pines won't remember us as villains. Sincerely, Ethan Moore. I read it twice, then set it down next to my father's hat. A month later, Helen called again. We're hosting a community picnic, she said. The first one in over 10 years. Would you come as our guest of honor? I'm not much for speeches, I said. Then just bring the badge, she laughed. People feel safer when it's around. So that Saturday I showed up at the park by the lake, the same place where the graduation party had spiraled into chaos. Only this time there were kids laughing, families grilling burgers, and a local band playing old rock songs. The air smelled like charcoal and new beginnings. Helen took the microphone. 6 months ago, this community nearly fell apart. But thanks to honesty, hard work, and a little help from our chief, we found our way back. The crowd cheered. I raised a hand, politely embarrassed but proud. Then I spotted Ethan near the lemonade stand stacking chairs. When our eyes met, he gave a small nod. I nodded back. That was enough. Later that evening, as the sun melted into the lake, Rodriguez joined me by the water. "Crazy how quiet it is now," he said. "Yeah," I replied. "Quiet's a good sound when you've earned it." He chuckled. "So what happens next for the great HOA crusader?" "I think I'm done crusading," I said. "Let the bylaws take care of themselves for once." He smirked. "You saying you trust them?" I looked around at Helen, laughing, with residents at kids playing near the dock that had once been trashed, at neighbors finally talking without fear. For the first time I said, "Yeah, I do." That night back at my cabin, I poured a cup of coffee and stepped onto the dock. The moon shimmered on the water, calm and forgiving. I thought about Grace probably sitting in a cell somewhere, replaying every decision that led her there. I thought about Ethan trying to clean up both the shoreline and his family name. And I thought about how strange it was that justice didn't always roar. Sometimes it whispered. In the distance, I heard laughter echo from the park music life, a second chance. Maybe that's what justice really meant. Not punishment, restoration. I took a deep breath, let the night air settle over me, and smiled. Crystal Pines was finally free, and so was I. 6 months after the sentencing, life at Crystal Pines Lake had returned to a kind of peace I hadn't known since moving here. The water was clear again, the laughter at dusk was genuine, and for once the HOA didn't feel like a shadow lurking over every lawn. I'd thought about retiring, really retiring this time. Selling the cabin, maybe heading west where no one knew my name. But every morning when I stepped out onto my dock with that same chipped mug of coffee, I felt something I hadn't felt in years: belonging. The chaos was gone. The law had done its work. But peace has its own kind of noise. One crisp Saturday morning, I was repainting the edge of my dock when a familiar voice called out behind me. "Hey, Chief." I turned around and saw Ethan Moore carrying a bucket and a folded sign. His face looked older, somehow calmer, humbled. Gone were the flashy clothes and swagger. He wore a plain gray shirt with the logo of a local youth center. He pointed at the sign, "Community Cleanup Day, sponsored by Respect and Responsibility Foundation." I raised an eyebrow. Catchy name. He smiled nervously. "I thought so too. It's, kind of inspired by you." I laughed. "You're saying I've become a non-profit?" "More like a moral lesson," he said, scratching the back of his neck. "After everything that happened, I wanted to do something that actually helps people, so I started volunteering. Then we turned it into a small organization. We teach teens about responsibility, boundaries, that sort of thing." "That's one hell of a turnaround," I said. "Your mom would be proud." He looked down. "She wrote me last week." I didn't say anything. She said prison's not what she expected. She runs the laundry unit, helps other women study for their GEDs. Says it's weird she feels more useful there than she ever did running the HOA. There was a long silence filled only by the sound of water tapping the dock posts. "She's different now," he said quietly. "I think she finally gets it." "Good," I said. "Then something good came out of all this." Ethan nodded. "I just wanted to thank you for not letting her destroy herself completely." Later that afternoon, the HOA hosted a memorial event, though not for anyone dead, thankfully. They called it the rebuilding ceremony. The community center, once the site of shouting matches and absurd fines, was now filled with neighbors carrying trays of food, children playing near the stage, and Helen Graves standing proudly behind a new banner, "Crystal Pines, a community of accountability and kindness." When she saw me walk in, she smiled and motioned for me to come forward. "Everyone," she announced into the microphone, "I'd like to thank Chief Brian Nelson for reminding us that laws exist to protect, not to control. That fairness can be firm and justice can be kind." There was applause. Real, warm applause. Helen continued, "In honor of his efforts and of the lessons we all learned, we're introducing a permanent community award, the Nelson Integrity Grant, funding small local projects that promote education, safety, and honesty." I blinked, taken off guard. "You didn't have to do that." Helen chuckled. "We did. Consider it restitution for years of HOA nonsense." The crowd laughed and I couldn't help but join in. After the ceremony, I walked outside for some air. The lake glimmered under the late afternoon sun, and the air smelled of barbecues and pine. Ethan was near the edge of the crowd handing out flyers for his foundation. When he noticed me, he gave a small wave. "We're doing a fundraiser next month," he said. "Half the proceeds go to a scholarship for teens who've had run-ins with the law." "You mean like you?" I asked, smirking. "Exactly like me," he said, smiling back. "Redemption should be contagious." I laughed, shaking his hand. His grip was firm, confident, but not arrogant, the kind of handshake that said he'd finally figured out who he was. "Keep doing what you're doing," I said. "The world could use fewer Karens and more second chances." He grinned. "You should put that on a t-shirt." That evening, as the sun began to set, I sat on my dock with a fresh cup of coffee and looked across the calm water. The reflection of the cabins shimmered like tiny lanterns. From somewhere down the road, I heard the sound of guitars, kids from the neighborhood playing music by the fire pit. For once, no one was complaining about the noise. Helen had given me the final audit report that morning. Every missing dollar from Grace's years had been repaid, some through restitution, some through donations by residents who wanted to heal the community's image. The books were clean, the lake was clean, even the air felt lighter. I took out my phone, opened the photo gallery, and scrolled to one of the first pictures I'd taken the night of the party, the flashing police lights, the chaos, the confusion. I compared it to the view, now quiet, golden light reflecting off still water. What a difference a few months of truth can make. A small knock came at the door behind me. When I turned, Helen was standing there holding an envelope. "Thought you'd like to see this," she said, handing it to me. Inside was a handwritten letter on lined paper. The handwriting was careful, almost delicate. "Dear Chief Nelson, I've had a lot of time to think in here. At first I blamed everyone, my husband, the HOA, you. But the truth is, I built a world that revolved around control. The more I tried to make people perfect, the further I fell from being decent myself. You didn't humiliate me. You saved me from the person I'd become. I know apologies don't fix the past, but I'm still going to try. Maybe someday when I walk out of here, I'll earn the right to shake your hand. Tell Ethan I'm proud of him. Tell Helen to keep the HOA honest. And tell the lake I'm sorry for what I did to it." Grace Moore. I folded the letter carefully and set it on the table beside my father's old fishing hat. For a long moment I just sat there listening to the quiet rhythm of the waves. It struck me that sometimes justice doesn't destroy, it rebuilds. Not all fences need to be torn down, some just need repainting. Later that night I walked down to the end of the dock, where the reflection of the stars looked almost close enough to touch. The voiceover of my own thoughts came naturally, like a closing monologue to a story I hadn't realized was ending. Power without empathy is corruption. Order without fairness is tyranny. But when people learn to respect what isn't theirs and protect what is, that's when communities heal. I looked up at the hills where porch lights flickered like distant constellations. Grace thought control was power. Ethan thought rebellion was freedom. But the truth sits somewhere in between, where law meets understanding and justice meets forgiveness. I smiled, breathing in the cool lake air. Some people think peace is silence. But here at Crystal Pines, peace is knowing that every sound, every laugh, every splash, every guitar chord is finally earned. Before heading in, I snapped one last photo, the moon over the lake, the cabin lights glowing, the world finally steady again. I captioned it simply, "Balance restored." I set my phone down, leaned back in my chair, and whispered into the night, "Dad, I think we did all right." And for the first time since that knock on my door months ago, I truly believed it. When you live long enough, you realize not every victory comes with fireworks. Some arrive quietly through patience, proof, and persistence. Grace Moore wasn't born a villain. She became one when power went unchecked. Her son wasn't doomed to follow her path. He just needed someone to show him where the line was drawn. That's what justice really is. Not vengeance, not humiliation, but accountability with compassion. If you've ever faced someone like Grace, a boss, a neighbor, or even an HOA president, remember, you don't have to fight fire with fire. Sometimes all it takes is shining a steady light until the truth shows itself. Because law without empathy is just control. But empathy backed by law, that's peace. Now I want to hear from you. Have you ever had to stand up to someone abusing their power? How did you handle it? Share your story in the comments. And don't forget to hit subscribe so you can join our growing community of everyday fighters who turn drama into justice.